Welcome to the World of Eora, a news and lore podcast about the Pillars of Eternity games, as well as Obsidian Entertainment's upcoming release, Avowed. Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of the World of Eora. I'm your host Eric, aka Gingerino. Thanks everyone for joining me on today's episode as we dive into the history, lore, and game mechanics for Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2 as we gear up for the release of Avowed. And today we're going to be diving into the trailer for the story of Avowed. If you're new to this show, thank you for joining me. Welcome to the show. Happy to have you here. This show is exactly what it sounds like. We focus on the lore and the news of Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2 and Avowed. If you're not familiar with Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2, why it's even being paired with Avowed, it's because it shares the same fantasy setting known as Eora. And so for the last few years, we've been looking at Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2 and trying to understand more about the world as we gear up for the release of Avowed. And then when Avowed comes out, we can just have a better and more nuanced appreciation for that game and the stories that happen there and kind of understand the world already. Even though Obsidian has stated that you don't actually need to know everything from Pillars of Eternity to appreciate Avowed. For those who want it, here it is. Anyways, that's what the show's all about. Happy to have you here. If you are new to the show, I'm going to signpost you towards episode number 80, I believe, is the one where I kind of say, here are the episodes to try out if you're brand new. That will give you a real feel for the world, and then you can kind of go at your own pace after that. For those who've been listening for a long time, today what we're going to be talking about is the story trailer that dropped from Obsidian Entertainment at the Xbox Showcase 2024 on June 9th. Now, funny little story, I put out an episode last week, which I might remove after I put this episode out, just because there's no reason for it to stay up, where I gave my initial reactions to that story trailer, and it was hilarious. I was recording it, and I had a few things there where I'm like, I'm not sure what this is, like the lady with the fire eyes, I didn't know who she was, I wasn't sure. She looked familiar, but I wasn't sure, and then I was like kind of unsure about the third narrator and all that kind of a thing. I kid you not, I uploaded the episode, and in that moment, the article on Xbox News, or Xbox Wire, I guess it is, dropped saying that, like, oh, this is Inquisitor Ludwin, and that third voice is Giada, and a whole bunch of other things I was speculating about, and those questions got answered. So that was really funny. It was kind of egg on my face moment, because it looked like I didn't know anything. But I just, I didn't want to say anything in that episode conclusively and then be wrong. Not because I'm afraid of being wrong, but I don't want to have other people be informed incorrectly, you know what I'm saying? Anyways, it was a funny moment. So anyways, that was last week's episode. I put out a bonus episode of my initial reactions for the story trailer. And I have been watching it over and over and over again for the last week. And we're going to be talking about it today. I had mentioned last week that I was going to try to split today's episode into two segments. I was going to have like a new player segment and an old player segment to, for lack of a better word. I think I'm not going to do that this week just because I kind of realized that there is an imbalance between those two segments. As well, I feel like there should be a way to jump into all of this lore in an accessible way. So instead, I'm going to go through it in order that we watch. So that way, if you wanted to listen to this episode and at any point go back and watch it in order, then you'll be able to, it'll line up a little bit better, right? So I'm going to talk about the things in the order that we see them in the trailer themselves. So before we dive in the lore, there's a little bit of news to go over. I'm not going to go over it into detail because, Lord, I could probably do 2 episodes on the amount of news that we had drop for Avowed, but I will point you guys in the direction of this stuff, and then we'll dive more into it later in another episode. But I think a lot of this stuff would be more impactful for you to read personally anyways, even though I'll kind of summarize what's going on. So, first piece of news, on June 9th at the Xbox Showcase 2024, if you're not already aware, the story trailer for Avowed dropped there, and we got to see a little bit about what's going on there, and I'll talk more about it in detail in today's episode. As well, there were 2 particular articles that came out. One was through Xbox Wire, which I believe is the official news channel for Xbox, and it dropped actually a lot of information. It mentioned that the person that we see in the trailer is Inquisitor Ludwin, who I'll talk about later, as well that one of the narrating voices was Giada. It goes into detail a little bit more about what's going on at large within the Living Lands, and so we have some more details on there that we can cover. But I'll talk more about that, I think, on next week's episode, or maybe at the end of today's episode, depending on how fast this recording goes. As well, there was an article by, I can't remember, was it Eurogamer? I don't know if maybe it was from somewhere else, but as far as I can tell, that's where the article is. There's a little bit more information in there. Personally, I didn't find anything that was noteworthy or new that we haven't already talked about on the show, or that we don't hear about through other sources. But Carrie Patel does take the time to talk about the Xbox closures that have been happening within Microsoft. So if you're interested at all about her comments on that, Carrie Patel, of course, being the game director for Avowed, by all means, go ahead and look that up on Eurogamer.net. A couple other pieces of news. One is that the Obsidian Entertainment website had kind of a whoopsie in releasing, well, not releasing, but they said in a description for Avowed that they were looking forward to us playing the game on November 12th, 2024. So it seems to me like there might have been an idea at one point in time in Obsidian that they were going to release this game on November 12th later this year. That has been updated and taken off the website since that went up, but of course a lot of people got screenshots of it as evidence that this was already there. Now, does this mean that Avowed is coming out November 12th? Not necessarily. I think it maybe gives us a good idea of the window that Obsidian is looking at for when they can release it. But here's the thing. If they knew when they were wanting to release Avowed, they would have just said so in the story trailer, right? Like, there's no reason why you wouldn't put that detail in there. That would hype everyone up. They would love that, right? So obviously, there might be some debate maybe within the company itself, or it might be a policy thing. They might be like, hey, no matter how sure we are a game's coming out, we do not announce a release date until 6 months from the day itself. Something. It could be anything like that. So is it going to release on November 12th? Not necessarily. Does it seem like that's the direction that Obsidian was going for? Yeah, and that kind of lines up with the fall 2024. So I am going to be keeping an eye on early November for myself personally. But so tentatively November 12th is what it seemed like they were going for. Who knows what it actually is going to end up being, but at least we kind of have an indication there. And the last piece of news, and I promise I'll try to blow through this quickly so we can get to the lore today, is that if you want more stuff of Avowed, there is a 27-minute long video that you can go look up or you can listen to. It is through the Xbox official podcast. It is a deep dive on Avowed. We see a lot more gameplay. We see variability in how you can approach quests. We get to see the menu. We get to see like the actual menu where you level up your character. We actually get to see our main character. And spoiler alert for this video, if you want to go kind of discover this for yourself, pause right now and go watch it. But we learned something really interesting about our player character, and that is that you are a godlike character, which is freaking fantastic. I am so over the moon about this. I was okay with being a human or an elf, but being a godlike is something that's really, I personally, I am very happy about that. I'm okay with that being forced upon my player character, and it also kind of makes sense for why we would be special within this world. I'll talk more about that on next week's episode when I talk about what was in that 27-minute video. We're not going to cover that today. We're just going to be doing the story trailer today to kind of lay that foundation and move forward. But yeah, a lot of details in there. We got the names of other companions. It seems like there's only going to be 4 companions, and we have the name for them all now. We got to see an Orlan, what they look like in the game. Her name was Yatsley. She was really cool. But yeah, so the Orlan race that exists within this world, we got to see that. A whole bunch of stuff. I don't want to take too much time up here. If you haven't already checked it out, I highly recommend go checking it out. It is going to be the main thing I talk about next week, but there is also, obviously, based off what I've already told you just now, a lot to cover. So let's get started, shall we? Let's start looking at the lore and the story of we see in the story trailer for Avowed.
I'm curious. What exactly did you find there?
So I am going to be watching the Avowed story trailer on Obsidian Entertainment, and we're just going to go through this in the order that things display, and I will talk about any associative lore that we see here on the episode. So the first thing I want to talk about pretty early on within the video is this shot. If you haven't already seen this, by the way, go look up Avowed story trailer on YouTube. That'll give a lot of context to what we're talking about. The first thing I want to point out is this one scene where it's an overhead shot and we are in a sort of throne room. The things I want to point out about this particular scene is actually kind of lengthy, but I'll try to keep it as short as I possibly can. The person that is talking to you, the player character, who is theoretically the person kneeling before the throne, there is a person in one of the seats on this throne area here, and it is referred to as the Emperor. Behind the Emperor on the wall, there is this symbol of a scepter on a banner. And actually, if you look carefully enough, if you have brightness turned up, there's 2 other banners to the left and right flanking either side of it. There, you see that banner again. It actually appears kind of all over the room. This is the symbol for the Empire of Aedir. Now, we already know that our player character comes from the Empire of Aedir. We are actually an envoy, so we are representing the nation of Aedir in the Living Lands and what its interests are. This symbol of a scepter is the common icon that we see in relation to it. Like, that's basically their national flag, is this image of a scepter. This scepter actually refers to a specific scepter within their culture called, I don't know how to pronounce this. It's INE space GYRD. Is it like Inegird or Eingard or something like that? Anyways, either way, this particular scepter is one that is only owned by the royalty of Aedir, and it is said to contain the souls of all the previous kings and queens of Aedir. So there's a piece of Adra, which is a unique gemstone in this world that has the capability to house souls within inside of it. Essence, which is the stuff souls are made of. Apparently this scepter, Inegird, or Eingard, whatever it's called, has Adra on it, and it has the souls of all the previous kings and queens on it. So it's a pretty important scepter within the culture of this nation, this empire, and that's why we also see it on the banners representing this nation. Now, another quick thing that I want to point out here is that the person that is talking to you, the player character, is referred to as the Emperor, even by the subtitles. Now, technically speaking, while that is true, this is the Emperor, they do have a formal name within their society, and the name of the Emperor in Aedir is Verkoning, which translates from Old Aediran, or Eld Aediran as it's called in the game, meaning first king. That's what it is. And typically the king of Aedir is a human. Now, if you are paying attention enough at this scene, you'll notice that there are actually two seats on this throne, and that is exactly for what it sounds like. There is a king and there is a queen. The queen is referred to as the Hea May Queen, which means illustrious queen in the old Kuklin language of the elves from back then. The queen of this empire is typically an elf. The reason for a human king and an elven queen actually has to do with the history of Aedir and the origins of their people groups. Long before they were the Empire of Aedir, there were these meadow-humans called the people of the deer, and then there were these elves of the woods in the Seathwood called the Kuklin elves, and they used to be warring with each other. Anyways, they decided that instead of fighting, it would be better to work together, so they decided to create the one empire of Aedir, the Aediran Empire. And I believe that the uniting of the human king and the elven queen, it represents that, right? That's why they have those monarchs. Well, an interesting thing to note is that there's no interbreeding in this world, so there's no like half elf, half human people running around. And so having a relationship between a king and queen like this could just be 100% ceremonial. There might not be personal relationship in there. It does bring up an interesting question of like, how do romantic relationships work between different species, but what if they also want to raise a family? How do they do that? There is a ceremonial marriage in the Empire of Aedir called Heimneg, where they do kind of address this. I'm not going to get into too much detail about it right now because we're already going on long enough about this one particular scene, but I don't know, for me it's a fun thing to think about. Like, okay, there's no interspecies breeding, but there can be romance between different species. So then, does that mean they have like side hustles for like, do they have people on the side that they make families with, but they're actually like ceremonially married to these other people? Like, how does that work out in a society? I don't know. It's an interesting question. Maybe we'll learn more about it in Avowed. But yeah, so that's just that first scene. We see a few times throughout the video these little reptilian creatures that kind of look like little dragons running around on their feet, but not really dragons. They don't have wings or anything like that. These are Zorups. If you're familiar with D&D parlance, they're a lot like kobolds, but they're not kobolds. They're called Zorups. They're a unique version of that for the world that Obsidian has created with Eora. Zorups we've already seen in previous episodes, and I've done a full episode on them if you want to talk more about them there, or hear more about them there. The thing I like about Zorups is that where there are Zorups, there is usually the indication of a dragon somewhere in the world. So hopefully we'll be able to run a dragon within Avowed. We get our first glimpse at what are called dream thralls within this game. It occurs pretty early on in the trailer where these humanoid characters covered in mushrooms and fungus, and they kind of running at you almost like they're zombies. These are creatures called dream thralls, which we know a little bit more about from reading the Xbox Wire news article. That essentially, this is the final form of the soul plague known as the Dream Scourge that we hear about in this trailer, that when people kind of fully succumb to the Dream Scourge plague, that they turn into these dream thralls, and that explains these humanoids with the mushrooms growing on them that attack you on sight, or even the bear that we saw in a previous trailer, that this is kind of the final form of this thing. The idea behind it, that as I'm to understand it, is that it's basically an infection through your dreams, and it slowly drives you mad or like empties out your soul or something along those lines. I'm going to do a little bit more research before I make a conclusion on that. But yeah, so these are people that have been basically driven mad, and they are fully infected by the Dream Scourge, and that's what a Dream Thrall is. So we get our first glimpse at that. There's definitely a lot of interesting lore behind the Dream Scourge we don't know about, obviously, but we see a lot of things related to mushrooms and spiritual relationship there that I think there's a lot to speculate on, and we'll probably talk about that more later. At multiple points through this trailer, we see this green gemstone kind of sticking out of the ground. There's this one scene where it's covered in vines and it's kind of out of shallow water. This green gemstone is Audra. I've already mentioned it on today's episode, and I mention it multiple times in almost every single episode because it's that central to the stories in Eora. And Audra, in short, is essentially a unique mystical substance, and what it is capable of doing is housing essence. Essence is the stuff that souls are made of. So you have a soul, I have a soul. Your soul could be put into a piece of Audra. It also plays a really important role in the cycle of reincarnation. When a person dies and their soul leaves their body, they usually go to the nearest piece of Audra, and that somehow they are able to transport themselves or their soul's self to the beyond, capital B beyond, where the gods are. And that is like the first step in the cycle of reincarnation. So Audra is really important for that. It's a very central part in a lot of cultures, and it's going to be a central part in a lot of the narratives we play in the game of Avowed. We see a number of ruins throughout this entire trailer that I've speculated could be dwarven, because dwarves like to explore the world and they kind of just set up camp and then move on. It could be Ngwithin, who is a civilization and race of people from a long, long time ago that then just disappeared off the face of Eora. But I'm starting to think that the ruins that we see in the Living Lands, or the trailers for the Living Lands, are actually ruins of a faction known as Godless, which we learn about in the deep dive trailer. So I'm not going to talk about it too much here today because we're focusing on the story trailer, but it definitely seems to indicate that this faction known as the Godless, that the ruins we're seeing in the trailer belong to them. They apparently lived in the Living Lands a long, long time ago, and then they kind of got run out or something like that. We don't really know yet, obviously. They haven't really had much of a presence in the Living Lands, but clearly they are still running around in their own way. So my guess is that those ruins actually belong to that faction, that group of people. We'll learn more next week and as Obsidian reveals more information. The next thing that I want to talk about, however, is Inquisitor Ludwin. I always want to say Lodwin because it's Lodwyn, but the O has the 2 dots symbol over it, so I believe it's supposed to be pronounced Ludwin, and I think I heard Carrie Patel pronounce it like that as well. Inquisitor Ludwin, she's the lady with the fire eyes, if you're watching the story trailer. She is actually a returning character from Pillars of Eternity 2, Deadfire. Now, when I first watched the story trailer, I, like many people, I've played this game 100 times, both of the games a lot, that is. I've even done research on Inquisitor Ludwin, and for whatever reason, I did not recognize her at all. Like, it went right over my head. But there was a lot of really crazy Pillars of Eternity geeks out there who immediately they knew who it was. And I'm so glad for people out there who caught that kind of a thing. But they also do mention it in the Xbox article as well. The captions, if you're on a particular video on YouTube, the captions actually call her Ludwin. So you could pick up on that. Anyways, the things we're going to talk about for Inquisitor Ludwin for the purposes of today's episode, like who is she? What purpose does she have in the Living Lands? And like what's her history there? So Inquisitor Ludwin is actually a minor NPC in the second Pillars of Eternity game. You could technically speaking miss her entirely if you're not exploring the world at large, if you're not following every side quest you get, you technically could miss her. She is the head of one of the chapters of a paladin order known as the Steel Garrote. Now, paladins, if you're not familiar with a lot of fantasy media, they're basically the religious zealots in worlds and a lot of fantasy media. They're ironclad knight who, in the name of their god, slays the heretics or things like that. You know, paladins are more than that, depending on what type of fantasy media you're consuming. But anyways, in the purposes they are martial zealots, and they can unify under the name of a god or a philosophy or an ideal or even just a promise or what have you, or just a contract. The Steel Garrote, the thing that you need to know about the Steel Garrote, which is the name for this order of paladin, is that they typically are people, they're an extremist group, so they're very radicalized, and they typically hunt down people that they would call oath breakers. This is because the Steel Garrote align themselves with the goddess Woodica, goddess of rightful rulership, goddess of law and justice and vengeance, amongst other things. And they have a very zero tolerance policy when it comes to oath breakers, which is people who made contracts or promises with other people and then went back on those contracts or promises. Now, here's the thing. they don't take any quarters to what the contract was. It could have been a fair contract and someone took advantage of it by just saying, I ain't going to fulfill my contract, screw you. It could have also been a contract that was really oppressive and it was unfair to a person that was in the contract. But still, if you agreed to these terms and conditions, then you have to abide by them. And the Steel Garrote are very extremist in hunting down Oathbreakers. At least that's the idea that we're presented by in the second Pillars of Eternity game. And Inquisitor Ludwin is a leader within this entire Paladin order. I don't know if she's the leader, maybe she is, but she's definitely a leader. She's a big player within the Steel Garrote at large. And so she very likely worships the goddess Woodica, which is interesting, because that means we'll have Woodica making a kind of appearance in all 3 Eoran-based games. Not a big surprise there. She makes for a good antagonist, or protagonist, if you really want to align with her, I suppose. And we really don't know a lot more than that. There's a specific side quest in the Deadfire game where you get to interact with her, and you can kind of decide her fate. Most people, by my understanding, end up killing her, so it's interesting to see her make this return to the game, because that canonizes that she would have survived. A couple people have theorized that Inquisitor Ludwin is actually being inhabited by the goddess Woodica, and there's definitely some precedent for that could be happening. I do, however, get the feeling from Carrie Patel that she was excited to see this character return to the game of Avowed, and so I'm getting more of an impression that this is actually Inquisitor Ludwin, which means they would have canonized that she was not killed in the Deadfire game, which, for those of you that care, whatever. It's their story. They're allowed to canonize anything they want. This is a minor NPC. A lot of people might have even not known who this was or ever run into her. So I think it's fine for Obsidian to do that. It's their right to do that. I understand that people don't want to have their character choices kind of stepped on in previous games, but I mean, this kind of thing has happened in games before where they have to canonize a certain ending for the sake of certain games. It's happened in other series. But, I get it. That being said, it might also not be canonized. There is the potential that Inquisitor Ludwin may or may not have been killed in the Deadfire by you, the Watcher, the person who is the main character in the second game, and Woodica, for whatever reason or however she did it, found a way to bring Inquisitor Ludwin back. Because as we all know, if we've played Pillars 1 or 2, Woodica does not play by the rules, even though she is the goddess of rules. So there you go. There's definitely that going on. That is the potential there. Now, you've been sent to the Living Lands, as we all know by now if you've been paying attention, to the Living Lands by the Fair Koning, that is the Emperor of Aedir, to eradicate the Dream Scourge. Now, we don't know the motivation for why. Perhaps he's concerned that the plague could break out and then come to his empire and it would affect his people. Perhaps they have projects or prospects or things that they're wanting to accomplish in the Living Lands, and this Dream Scourge is getting in the way of them completing those projects, and so he's sending you to go deal with it by just getting rid of it. Inquisitor Ludwin of the Steel Garrote Paladin Order, she has a different take on it. She thinks that this is a symptom of something deeper, and that you should actually harness its power, that you should tame and control the Dream Scourge or whatever's going on here for different purposes. So there's one option of destroying it. We have this other option of controlling it. And then later on, we're going to talk about the third option of letting it be or encouraging it. We get a few interesting shots of just regular NPCs in a settlement doing their own thing. If you notice the person with kind of green, bluish skin, that is a Amauen person. It is one of the unique fantasy races of this world. I've done an episode on Amauens if you want to learn more about them. In the shot just prior to this one, we saw some people weeping over a coffin. They look like those are ocean folk, so very likely Vailian people. That means there might be a Vailian presence within this game, which would be surprising if there weren't, honestly. The Vailians are everywhere at this point. A really interesting shot involving a spiritual entity. So there's this one humanoid that looks bright and purple and kind of ghost-like. They are exactly what they look like. They are a specter of some sort. They are a phantom. We don't actually know what they are, but they're definitely a spiritual entity. And what I find interesting about them, though, as well, is that they appear to look like a nature godlike, which would be a godlike person associated with the god Galawain, god of nature, lord of the hunt in all of its forms. Quick synopsis on what a godlike is. Basically, normal people are going to have a baby, and while the baby's in the womb, one of the gods bless that baby, and comes out physiologically a little bit different. It looks like it's associated with one of the gods. So a fire godlike will be born to normal parents, but the fire godlike themselves might have fire for hair, might have demon horns that end up growing out of their head. They might have sparks that follow them wherever they walk, things like that, right? So it's a lot of unique flair that makes the godlike who they are. They also have a association to a particular god. They probably also have a magical aura about them. but we can get into them a little bit more on a different episode. I also do an episode on the godlike if you're more interested in learning about that unique race that you see within this fantasy world. But yeah, this spiritual ghosty creature person thingy, they look like they are a nature godlike. Why our character can talk to a ghost, sorry, not a ghost, I shouldn't use that word, that's not technically what it is, but why our character can talk to this spiritual person is an interesting one, because as far as I understand it, the character in Avowed is not a watcher, so this must be a particularly important part in the narrative. Like, this must be a very unique situation that our character is just talking with this spiritual entity. And we actually see them appear later in the story trailer alongside a couple other spiritual phantoms that look the same. So they might actually be the same person. We don't know. This is all speculation at this point. But it's cool to see that they're a nature godlike. And the Living Lands having nature godlike in it, I wouldn't be surprised. So I'm wondering if this is actually a person from a long time ago who is tied to the history of the Living Lands. And later on in this story trailer, if you look carefully behind these three spiritual people, you'll actually notice a mural in the background that is depicting something, and I'll talk more about it when we get to it. An interesting shot shortly after we see Inquisitor Ludwig kicking down a dwarf, there is a drawbridge being lowered toward the player character. And if you look to your right, you will see a character that we're familiar with from other trailers of Avowed. This is Kai. He is a coastal Amauan from the Empire of Rawatai. We've already talked about him at length, so if you want to go learn more about him, you can listen to the episode, or you can go read about him, as there is actually already some fandom articles, and there's a cosplay guide for him. So there's some information about who Kai is, where he comes from, and his militaristic background with Rawatai. On the left is a character that we don't know yet. Now, by going into the deep dive 27-minute long video, if you're careful with the subtitles, you can find out that this person's name is, I believe, Marius. Marius here on the left on this shot, when you're standing in front of this lava castle with the drawbridge full down, looks like a dwarf. So it looks like we have a dwarven companion, and there's some interesting things about this dwarven companion that I'm kind of speculating on. One is that he appears to have a lot of garb of a ranger. He's got a bow and he's got some arrows. He's got a backpack with a bedroll on it. And when you pair that he is likely a dwarf based on his short and stocky nature with this stuff that he's wearing, it's not at all out of the question to surmise that perhaps this dwarf, supposedly named Marius, is from the island nation of Nasi Tak, which I've recently done an episode on. They're a very interesting country. They have a lot of tribal societies on there, mostly comprised of boreal dwarves, which is what I'm guessing that Marius here is. And it's really interesting to see why Marius would be so far away from his homeland. For those who played Pillars of Eternity 1, we had just such a companion as well in the form of Sagani, who had left her people group in Nasi Tak to go and find the reincarnated soul of her former elder to let him know how their tribe was doing. Perhaps Marius is on a similar quest, which some people might think is like recycled content, but personally speaking, I kind of like it because for those who have played Pillars of Eternity, it'll be kind of a head nod to those who'll be like, hey, this person's just like Sagani. But for new players, it's just an interesting new character, and they get to also experience that kind of narrative of this person coming from a foreign land to this new area. Maybe they're looking for the reincarnated soul of their previous elder. Who knows? One other thing that I'm really hoping for, and this is a bit of a stretch. On the hood that Marius is wearing, I'm seeing an eye symbol, and I'm really, really, really hoping that this symbol is associated with the god Wael, W-A-E-L, the god of dreams, secret mysteries, and revelations, because it's my favorite god in the whole pantheon, and I really love any lore associated with him. So if I have a companion who is going to be a dedicated Waelite, which I'm really hoping Marius is, then I'm over the moon. I'm so excited to learn more about that stuff and see what kind of things he talks about. Now, it's a bit of a stretch. It could just be something on this guy's hood for, aesthetic flair. It might have nothing to do with Wael, but, I'm really hoping it has something to do with him. Anyway, so that's Marius, the dwarf companion of ours that we will have, who I'm guessing is from Nasi Tak, or it might just be an explorative dwarf. You would also expect to see a dwarf who's exploring the area of the Living Lands to have a bow and arrow and a bedroll on them, right? So I guess it's not out of the question that they're just a mountain dwarf instead, or something like that. But hey, I think it'd be cool if they were also from Nasi Tak. It's not out of the question. Anyways, moving on. There's an interesting scene where we kind of travel through this beam of light, and we end up in kind of a cosmic area with, stars and constellations and galaxies in the background and floating isles in the middle of the screen. This is very likely the Beyond, the capital B Beyond. It's the place where the gods dwell. It's a completely other plane of existence. It's where your soul goes after you die to be with the gods for a while, and then your soul leaves the beyond and comes back to the here and the now, which is the mundane world. We're very likely getting either a glimpse into the beyond or the more liminal in-between space, literally called the in-between, so in between life and death kind of a thing. There is a space between those two planes. This is either the in-between or it's the beyond that we're getting a quick glimpse at, which I think hints at there's going to be a part of the mainline narrative of the Living Lands that has to do with the spiritual. It has to do with the beyond. Our character will be venturing into this kind of a space, or that it'll be part of the story, which I'm more excited about. That's the kind of thing I really, really like in the World of Eora and really any kind of fantasy media. But to what extent and how it's going to work, we don't know. There is a scene later on in this trailer where the perspective of the player character, or the person in the video anyways, is moving towards a giant pillar of Adra in the beyond, and they enter into a bright light. This is actually very similar to the opening scene of the second Pillars of Eternity game, when you're walking through like this kind of like bridge of essence, which is stuff that souls are made of, and you get like the memories from the first game are playing in the background. It's kind of like a recap of what happened to your character. But before your character leaves the in-between and enters into the beyond, they are walking towards this pillar of Adra with this bright light flying out of it. So very similar to that. So I'm guessing at some point our player character is going to be entering into the in-between, and we are going to travel towards the beyond. Do we die? And is that how it happens? Or is this something different and metaphysical? I don't know. I guess we'll find out when we play the game. Because the in-between space is like that liminal space, like I said, that you exist in before you fully go over to the other side, if you will, which is like fully dead. You're only mostly dead at that point. And like I mentioned before, there was a third option for what we're going to do with the Dream Scourge, and it's at this point in the trailer where that comes up. So the first option, the Aediran Emperor, the Fair Koning, wants you to eradicate the Dream Scourge, and then we meet Inquisitor Ludwin, who wants us to control and tame it in some way. And now we have Giada, who is a confirmed companion for our player character in Avowed. She is the narrator for this section of the video, and she's saying that you shouldn't oppose the Dream Scourge, that this wild, chaotic force, you should actually protect it. You should actually try to foster its growth and let it do what it is here to do. And these kind of summarize what I imagine are going to be the three main choices that you can have as a player character in the game of Avowed, especially for the ending of, are you going to get rid of the Dream Scourge? Are you going to try to control it? Or are you going to encourage it? Are you going to be like on its side for some reason? Which I think implies a lot of interesting things. There was a lot of theories about what the Dream Scourge may or may not be in the Living Lands, and I think this idea that you can be something that fosters it, especially considering Giada refers to you as being the potential protector of the Living Lands by following this path, it makes me wonder if the Dream Scourge is actually from the Living Lands itself, if it's some sort of like self-defense mechanism. It makes me wonder if the godless faction that lived in the Living Lands a long time ago, if they maybe created the Dream Scourge for some reason and they just never used it, but it very recently got out. There is some lore that we learned from in a DLC for the second Pillars of Eternity game called Forgotten Sanctum, where there's a book, there's a couple of books in the History of Eora anthology that talk about this Orlan Empire that existed in the Living Lands that I believe it was the Ingwithans conquered at some point. There is also another book, same anthology, that talks about the Aediran Queen sending people to the Living Lands to basically civilize the savages that lived in that area. Either one of those narratives, I believe, could very well play a role in the history of the Living Lands and how the Dream Scourge came about, because in either of those cases, for the people that were living in the Living Lands, there might have been reason for them to develop a biological or spiritual weapon like the Dream Scourge in a way to fight back, but maybe they just never got to actually release it. I believe this was actually the theory of someone on Reddit who, unfortunately, I'm sorry, the name escapes me right now, but someone on Reddit actually came up with that theory way before I did, so credit goes to them. I'll try to get their name and put it back in the description. But yeah, there's a whole bunch of things about it. My personal theory is that the Dream Scourge is some sort of reaction from the Living Lands itself, of it's trying to protect itself from these foreigners who are maybe getting too close to something that they don't understand. What this has to do with you, your player character, though, that is a much more interesting question, because we already know from previous trailers that and interviews that our player character has a very personal and close tie to the Living Lands in some way. And we learned from the deep dive video that we are a godlike, but we don't know which god we are associated with. So it makes me wonder if perhaps we're like a living lands godlike in a weird sort of a way. I don't know. I'll talk more about it next week, but there's definitely a few theories running around of what kind of godlike you are. Perhaps you are a wall godlike because you're mysterious and no one knows what kind of godlike you are. And there's fungus, and not that wall is associated with fungus, but in the Forgotten Sanctum DLC, there's a lot of fungus running around. So yeah, just saying, the two of them seem to be together quite a lot. So maybe you're a wall godlike, but I'm wondering if you are actually something else entirely. Like maybe some sort of fungal sentient entity infiltrated the Beyond, and now they're making godlikes, or perhaps the living lands, because maybe it's an actual living lands. Like maybe it is an entire continent that is sentient. Maybe it is so powerful that it's able to create its own godlikes in the world. I don't know. A lot of this is pretty much stretching the lore as we know it. But I mean, they made a story about you being a mysterious godlike. I want to know what's going on. So these are kind of some of the ideas that I'm having so far. And I'm wondering what the connection between you and the Living Lands and the Dream Scourge is, because there's very clearly a connection. We just don't know what it is yet. Fun little scene nearing the 2/3 mark of the video where your character is walking towards a door and they have a weapon on their back. Two things to note about this is, one, that it is third-person perspective, which has been confirmed by Obsidian. We are playing in third person or first person. It's up to you, but the option is there. So rejoice, players. For those who really wanted to play in third or first person, you have the option for either. Or the fun thing for me about this scene is that this is an arquebus. This is basically a old-style rifle that exists. So we already kind of knew that those were going to be there, but it's just fun to see one actually in game. I know me personally, I want to play kind of a gun mage character. I'm really interested to see how Obsidian handles these old-timey weapons, and I really also want to utilize a lot of the magic, because that's where a lot of the lore is. So that was just for me. Now, a couple things to note here at the end of today's episode is, one, during the magical spell where they're casting ice, behind you, the clenched fist is actually an Orlin you get to see for half of a frame. If you're more interested in learning about Orlins, you can look at the deep dive video. There's one character that is really focused on, and she's an Orlin. I've also done episodes on the lore of Orlins if you want to check them out. The more interesting thing that I want to talk about is returning back to those spectral entities I was talking about, that nature godlike ghosty creature person. There's this scene at the end there when Obsidian is doing the forge your destiny and choose your side. When those things are happening, there are these scenes where these three specter entities in front of your player character who attacks them with a really interesting missile spell. The thing to note here is the three spiritual entities, they all look very much the same, which makes me wonder if they are just three different versions of the same person. But each one of them looks like a different archetype of character. The one on the left has a bow and arrow, the one in the middle has a longsword, and the one on the right is holding a wand and a grimoire, like they're a wizard. So I'm wondering why the separation. Are these three people separate? Like, were they triplets? Or is it one person and this just represents different aspects of them? Is it representing aspects of you, the player character? I don't know. We don't know what the relationship is between these people. But the fact that we can just see them and interact with them is really interesting in the first place. And also why this separation but similarity. I have nothing to work off of. But anyone who has theories of their own, please feel free to send them over to my inbox, worldofeora@gmail.com. However, something I do want to draw attention to in this scene, if you pause carefully at the right moment, you can see a few things. First off, there are these statues who I could not get a good look at them to the left and right of this mural that's in the middle. I don't know what those statues are, probably just notable people within this godless faction, I'm surmising. I'm guessing this is one of the godless ruins. As well, above the mural in the back, there is all this kind of script and iconography. So there's very clearly a story being told in this one section. If you're very careful with where you pause, you get a good look at the mural in the background. And it seems to depict a bunch of people running away from what looks like a tower in the background being bombarded by artillery. And this tower that's depicted in this mural looks very similar to some of the ruins that we've been seeing in not only this trailer, but other trailers as well. The question I have is this mural historic or is it prophetic? I think it's probably historic just because prophetic things in the world of Eora aren't very prevalent. It's not really something that can or does happen a lot. It's a fantasy place, so there is ways to make it work, obviously. But I feel like this is probably a historic mural. I'm guessing it has to do with whatever happened to the godless, this group of people that were living in the living lands, and then were very likely run out or attacked by another group of people, either the Ingwithans from a very long time ago, or the Aedir in more recent history. And so it looks like they were attacked or besieged at some point, and that's kind of what this mural, I think, is depicting. There's good evidence that could be either Ingwithans or Aedirans, especially since it looks like your player character is attacking these spiritual entities. If they are, let's say, spiritual guardians for this sacred area of the godless people, and if they were attacked by Aedirans, they'd look at you, they might be able to see your soul and recognize that you're an Aediran, and maybe they're hostile towards you right away because you're one of those people. Who knows, right? So we'll learn more, obviously, when the game comes out. But yeah, if you can get a good look at that mural, if anyone out there who has a lot of knowledge of the world of Eora wants to send any theories out, please, by all means, do. The last thing I'll mention, even though it's not as fantastical as this historic mural depicting a potentially interesting historical event within this world, is the magical spell that the person casts at the end there. I don't know what it is, but it definitely does seem like it's a Minoletta style of spell. Minoletta being one of the archmages of the world. Archmages in this world are fairly responsible for most of the magical spells that we see, especially wizards casting. And that's why they usually name them things after themselves, like Archimere's Dazzling Lights, or Minoletta's Minor Missiles. Minoletta is usually associated with missile-based magical attacks. So I'm guessing that's what that one is there. We're actually going to run into one of the archmages, Kalikoth, in the game of Avowed. That was kind of confirmed by Carrie Patel. I don't know if she was supposed to say it or not, but yeah, we're going to be running into one of the archmages who we have kind of surmised is Kalikoth, very heavily associated with ice-based magics. But yeah, after that, we get a little shot of our character being grabbed by some purple tendrils from what looks like the portal and sucked in. And we don't know what that has to do with anything, but it's certainly intriguing.
Is an oath worth the weight of a crown?
All right, and that's everything I want to talk about today. So, as I'm recording, I'm already at the 48-minute mark right now. This video is 1 minute and 27 seconds long, and the beginning and the end of it is actually just fluff. You don't even need to watch. So honestly, 1 minute and 27 seconds, and we have almost an hour of things to talk about. Now, granted, I did do 10 minutes of discussion at the beginning of today's episode with all the news and stuff that we've covered. There was a lot to cover. So thank you, everybody, for kind of following with me on this. I know I was moving pretty quickly and just kind of rocket launching a bunch of different topics of lore. For those of you who felt like there was a little bit much there to chew through, two things. One, feel free to listen to this again at a slower pace if you really want, because I get that there was a lot. Two, a lot of these topics I'm going to be putting out episodes on. Some of them I've already put out episodes on. I invite you to go check those out. But a few of them I think I'm going to re-record, or I'm going to do new versions of them. For instance, the Aedir Empire. I have talked about them a lot before, but that was nearly 3 years ago that those episodes came out, and I'm considering doing kind of a one big overview episode on them for anybody that's new listening to the show that wants to learn more about the nation of Aedir. But other than that, there's a lot of other things to talk about. The nature of souls and Adra, which I've already done episodes on. Those are worth checking out. I don't know if I'll re-record those. But yeah, for any topics of people out there that you're like, what is this about? What does that have to do? Whether you're a new listener or an old listener, send an email my way, worldofeora@gmail.com. I will prioritize the topics that you all want to listen to. But that is everything for today's episode. Thanks, everyone, for joining me on this long haul through this story trailer. I'm very excited for it. The more and more I think about it, I'm trying to think what my character is going to do. I think I'm either going to encourage the Dream Scourge to its final end and see what it does, or I'm going to go with Inquisitor Ludwin, because I think it's going to yield the most information. I think by going with the Fair Koning and just destroying the Dream Scourge, that I'm going to limit my reception of more lore, which is obviously the thing I care about the most. So I feel like I'm going to go one of those two routes. I'm thinking I might actually be pro Dream Scourge for my first playthrough, I suppose. We'll see. We'll see what the narrative is or what my choices even are. But yeah, definitely excited to meet the new companions. And I'm psyched to kind of theorize about what's going on. What kind of godlike are we? What is the Dream Scourge? What does anyone have to do with it? I have a lot of theories about the god Wall, and I'm really hoping that Wall is a central character in this because he's my favorite, but that might be me reading into it with a little bit too much hopefulness into it. But what about you guys? What are you listening? What are you hoping for? What are you theorizing on? What kind of things did you notice? What comments and stuff do you have? Send me an email, worldofeora@gmail.com. Even if you don't put any of that information on the show, I do love just talking about this stuff, and I know a lot of you guys do as well. So let's geeks get together and talk about some of the things we've seen and bring theories up. There's been a lot of theories that have been tossed around for the last year or so, and I've been able to put on the show that were other people's ideas. So I happily invite that. I'd love to get the conversation going. If you want to follow the show's Twitter at World of Eora, you can do so there, where I mostly post updates about the show, but I have more recently put a couple of little lore tidbits here and there on it. So if that's something you're interested in, follow me at World of Eora. If you want to support the show, perhaps you've been listening for a while, you can do so at ko-fi.com/worldofeora. As for myself, what have I been playing lately? I actually haven't been playing really much of anything. I have jumped into a game here or there. Lords of the Fallen came on Game Pass, so I gave it a shot, but mostly I've been trying to catch up on sleep. My son has not improved his sleep schedules, and it's been 3 weeks so far. And yeah, my wife and I are having a really hard time adjusting to it. We're going to have to make some pretty extensive plans on how to handle that pretty soon, because it's getting to the point where we're not functioning as well as we should have. And instead of playing a game, I'm recording this episode, which is fine. I love recording these shows, but I usually am able to play a game in the evening, and it's not happening. I get to goof around on my phone once in a while, 5 minutes here or there. So I'm trying to find something fun. If anyone's got actually a recommendation for a life situation like that, where you only get 5 to 10 minutes at a time, and you may or may not be at home, any good games out there that's worth just kind of plinking away at, let me know. worldofeora@gmail.com, or hit me up on Twitter at worldofeora. Thanks everyone for joining me today on today's episode, where we just completely dissected and talked at really quick pace all the different things that we're seeing in the story trailer and the associative lore with them. I hope it wasn't too much, and I hope I was able to present it in a way that a lot of you, especially if you're new listening to the show, that you're able to understand. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. I'd love to answer them. I hope to dive into these topics individually in upcoming episodes at a slower, more digestible pace, if you will. Next week, I really want to focus on the deep dive video and the things that we see there. I will not be going through it with the same granular pace as I did this one, because otherwise, as far as the math goes, it means it would be a 27-hour video, and not video recording, and I'm not going to do that. So I'm mostly just going to highlight a few key points and then talk about some speculations. I'm also going to have a speculation episode coming out, as well as individual topics from all the stuff that we're learning from all these different sources. There's a lot going on lately, so there's a lot of content to make. It's good eatins for those who are looking forward to Avowed. So I highly recommend any of you out there who are looking forward to the game to go and check out the news articles, the videos, and anything like that. Come up with theories, get into it, get in the community, the Discords, the Reddits, all of that stuff. All right, sorry for... okay, I'm done. I'm sorry. I'll let you go now. You're free. I love you all. My name is Eric, aka Gingerino. I'm your host. I'll see you guys next time.